The Audi Q5 is the SUV equivalent of the Audi A4. Over time, as more and more people discovered the advantages of such cars, it became increasingly popular, even on the used car market. Is it as good as all Audi models from that era? No, it's even better. As mentioned, the car shares much in common with the Audi A4, specifically the B8 generation. It was built on the MLB platform with longitudinally mounted engines. This allowed for the use of a classic quattro drive system with a center differential. The suspension is multi-link, made almost entirely of aluminum. The shock absorbers optionally have variable damping. The power steering is hydraulic for the facelift and electric after the facelift. The engine lineup can be divided into pre- and post-facelift versions. From the start of production, the basic units were the 2.0-liter TFSI petrol and TDI diesel. The petrols developed 180 and 211 horsepower, while the diesels produced 143 and 170 horsepower. Larger V6 engines complemented this lineup. The 3.2 FSI petrol developed 270 horsepower, and after the facelift, it was replaced by supercharged 3.0 TFSI variants with 272 horsepower and 354 horsepower SQ5 model. Of the larger diesels, the only available option was the 240 horsepower 3.0 TDI. The facelifted diesel engine lineup features the new EA288 family, formerly EA189. The 2-liter variants offered outputs of 150, 164, 177, and 190 horsepower. However, this change didn't occur from the 2012 model year onward, but rather occurred gradually between 2011 and 2013. An example is the modernization of the 3.0 TDI diesel engine, which first appeared in 2011 in a 245 horsepower version and remained in that form until 2014. A 258 horsepower engine debuted in 2013. Furthermore, the Audi SQ5 was also offered with 3.0 TDI engines, initially with 313 horsepower from 2012, and from the 2015 model year in a 326 horsepower competition version and a 340 horsepower version. As the SQ5 Plus. It's also worth mentioning a minor hybrid variant with a small battery and a 2.0 TFSI engine. This hybrid's total output is 245 horsepower, but its 1.3 kilowatt-hours battery only allows for short, low-speed electric travel in traffic jams. All engine variants featured permanent all-wheel drive, but the entry-level 143 and 150 horsepower diesels featured front-wheel drive. This is worth noting because although customers typically opted for the optional quattro, it's possible to find a car without it. Unfortunately, it should depreciate significantly, but it doesn't if you buy it from a dealer. It will depreciate significantly upon resale. Transmissions include a 6-speed manual, a 7-speed S-tronic, and an 8-speed Tiptronic. The former has a double clutch system, while the latter has a traditional torque converter. The 8-speed version was installed after the facelift. In the gasoline versions, an automatic transmission was always standard or optional, only in the 2.0 TFSI, while in the TDI versions, a manual was standard, while an automatic transmission was not always optional in the 2.0 TDI. Only automatic transmissions were offered with the V6 engines. One note, the 3.2 FSI comes standard with the S-tronic gearbox, but if the car is from the American market, it has a 6-speed Tiptronic. Which engine to choose? In the case of the Q5, just as the tried-and-true TDI diesels are tempting, the infamous 2.0 TFSI engines are equally discouraging. Looking at it from another perspective, diesel repairs are always significantly more expensive than petrol engines, and yet, assuming you're buying a roadworthy car, the savings from owning a diesel are measurable, as 2.0 TFSI engines consume between 9.5 and 10.5 L100 kilometers, depending on the variant, while diesels consume around 7 to 8 L100 kilometers. The petrol engine lineup doesn't lack power, but the diesel engine lineup does. For example, the 143 horsepower TDI doesn't offer satisfactory performance. In fact, it's only with the 170 horsepower variant that we can truly speak of proper dynamics. Meanwhile, the least powerful petrol engine has 180 horsepower. There's no clear answer to which to choose, even among the larger engines. The 3.0 TFSI receives positive reviews, but it's also very sensitive and fuel-hungry, with fuel consumption expected to be at least 12 liters 100 kilometers. Therefore, choosing the 3.0 TDI diesel may prove even more beneficial than the 2-liter engines. It averages around 8 liters 100 kilometers, but can drop to 6 liters 100 kilometers on the highway. However, its performance is on par with the 3.0 TFSI petrol engine. However, it's significantly more dynamic than the 3.2 FSI. In my opinion, when choosing an engine, you should consider your preferences regarding fuel consumption. The 2.0 TDI performs best, and performance, 2.0 TFSI, 3.0 TFSI, 3.0 TDI. Unfortunately, the 3.2 FSI isn't a compromise. It's probably the worst choice in terms of dynamics and fuel consumption. However, the 3.0-liter diesel is the worst in terms of cost, hands down. Let's start with the engines, especially the 2.0 TFSI, known for their high oil consumption and carbon buildup. It's worth noting that this mainly applies to pre-facelift units, as all were improved after 2012, including dual fuel injection, and since 2015, they've been completely free of this drawback. Secondly, even if you buy a pre-facelift car with a tendency to consume oil, the engine has usually already been repaired by a dealership or the owner, or replaced with a revised one. It's rare for an engine with such a significant defect to survive today. This, of course, doesn't mean your purchase is always safe. If you're looking for a pre-facelift car, it's best to opt for the 2.0 TDI diesel, or alternatively, expect the 2.0 TFSI to be repaired or replaced. This involves replacing the pistons and rings, but there are ready-made factory rebuild kits available, consisting of numerous components, including bolts and gaskets, costing from around €3,000 to €4,500. Additionally, the timing belt kit must be replaced, costing just over €1,000, although original kits can cost up to €3,000. If you insist on a petrol engine but are afraid to risk the 2.0 TFSI, you can opt for the 3.2 FSI as a conditional option. The requirement is a well-maintained model and no LPG system. Of course, you have to accept fuel consumption of around 12 to 13 liters per 100 kilometers. All repairs will be expensive, although the engine itself isn't particularly problematic. However, a timing belt replacement, often necessary around 200,000 to 250,000 kilometers, will cost around €2,800 for parts alone, plus at least 1 day of labor. The invoice can reach around €4,000 to €5,000. The related 3.0 TFSI engine, which is boosted by a mechanical supercharger, is generally praised by users, but neglect quickly backfires. This engine is prone to seizure and overheating. Pre-facelift cars equipped with the 2.0 TDI engine, especially early production models, should have their oil pump operation checked and repaired if necessary. Failure to do so can result in engine failure, but workshops specializing in Volkswagen Group vehicles are highly skilled at handling this issue. Therefore, diesel engines are not to be feared, although it's important to remember that repairs are quite expensive due to the number of components involved. On the other hand, they're less expensive than in cars of other brands. However, the engine itself and its components are very durable and generally trouble-free. Facelifted diesels are even better, but this is where the more advanced and faulty exhaust gas aftertreatment system comes into play. However, there are few complaints about the engine itself, and it's generally a safe choice. Buying a 3.0 TDI diesel engine, regardless of year, is risky. While the design itself is very durable, it has several vulnerable and very expensive areas. For example, a complete set of timing chains and drivetrain costs between €2,500 and €5,000, depending on the manufacturer. Replacement is a lengthy process, often involving other repairs, e.g. seals. The cost ranges from around €6,000 to €10,000. Fortunately, such replacements are typically performed every few years and around 300,000 kilometers. There are no major problems with the gearboxes, although repairs to the S-tronic gearbox are expensive. However, it typically lasts up to 300,000 kilometers without failure. Most often, problems arise with the mechatronics, and that's not a major overhaul either. A wet clutch with a dual-mass flywheel isn't particularly expensive, as replacements can be found for around Euro 2,000 to 2,500, but original parts cost twice as much. The 8-speed gearbox is a renowned ZF design, characterized by exceptional durability. There's no major concern here if the car has less than 500,000 kilometers on the clock. As for the remaining drivetrain components, such as the center and rear differentials, as well as the shafts, it's a very durable design. It's worth knowing that although it looks like a single component, the transmission itself in Quattro versions is divided into two parts, one for the front and one for the rear. There's no division like in BMWs or Mercedes, where the transmission and transfer case are clearly separated. The oil in both parts of the Quattro transmission requires a different oil change. Although the suspension is multi-link and largely made of aluminum, it can be repaired relatively inexpensively. There's no shortage of replacement silent blocks and ball joints on the market. Importantly, even complete control arms aren't overly expensive. However, the steering knuckles are sensitive to heavy loads. They can break after hitting a large pothole with force. One common problem with the pre-facelift Q5 is a squeaky steering shaft. It's worth checking this before buying. A new one will cost you around 1,500 euros. The hydraulic power steering pump isn't particularly durable either. It typically costs close to 2,000 euros, but there are cheap replacements for around 750 euros. How durable is it? It's hard to say. Interestingly, the electric servo system, post-facelift, is very durable, and if it fails, it costs less than 1,000 euros. The Audi Q5's body rarely corrodes, and if it does, it's usually at the junction between the fenders and bumpers. This is due to abrasion. However, the paint is quite delicate, and the black paint quickly loses its shine due to visible scratches, even from washing. Unfortunately, many examples are black, and if they haven't been properly detailed, they look poor. The aesthetics are also undermined by dull headlight lenses. They are often fogged or even cracked. The LED strips in facelifted headlights don't always work.